Hold on. Welcome to our Tradition Kitchens, Repair the World Atlanta and Reuven class, where we are excited to learn about pickling and fermenting from an expert on the Upper West Side. I'm Julia, co-founder of Tradition Kitchens, and I want to thank Repair the World Atlanta, in particular Abigail, who has been an incredible partner for us in this amazing class experience. And we're also thrilled to have Cecilia, Ben, and Lily from Repair the World Atlanta also on this call. So shout out to all of them. And I'm gonna turn it over first to Abigail to introduce herself, and then we're gonna toss it to Reuven for our exciting demonstration. And then we're gonna go back to Abigail and Repair the World and Atlanta and learn a little bit about the history of fermenting and pickling and preserving traditions. So we've already had a chance to introduce ourselves in the chat thread. If you haven't told us on the comments, you can also let us know what is your favorite vegetable that you are interested in pickling. And we're excited to have at least one person pickling along with us live during this class. So Abigail, a quick question. Are you also trying to join from another link? I think you are. So I'm going to re-add you. And there are a couple of others in the waiting room. So as Abigail comes back. Hi. Can you hear us okay? We see you, great. And I'm going to try to maybe unmute you. You are muted right now. Unmute. Okay. All right. As Abigail gets situated, maybe let's toss it over to Reuven for a quick intro and get started with the demo.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, we hear you great.
Okay, great. So, hi, I'm Reuven. Is there an echo?
A tiny echo.
Oh,
Let me investigate the echo.
I think it's, how about now?
I think it's good. I think we're good.
Okay, so I'm here as from Upper West Side Manhattan. I live in a nice sized Upper West Side apartment, but my kitchen is very narrow, so I had to set up this demonstration in my living room. So apologize for not having like the real kitchen setting where I normally do all this work. So I live in New York City. I'm a rabbi. I work for the Union for Reform Judaism in its central office, and my day job is I'm the director of Israel Education or Israel Engagement at the URJ, which means I do a lot of thinking about how we educate about Israel in North America. It's been a very busy day here because today in Israel, it was Yom HaZikaron, Memorial Day. Tonight in Israel starts Yom HaAtzmaut. And so I've been on webinars all day long on those themes. So this was a really nice break to do something that I really love that's sort of connected to my Israel engagement, but like not entirely. It's really a pleasure to be here with all of you with Repair the World Atlanta, which I got to know when I brought a fellowship I run to Atlanta and where I met Julia in Atlanta. So I'm glad that there's some of the experiences that I had working at the URJ that brought me to Atlanta and now coming back in a new form. Do you want me to go on, or do you want to go back to?
Yeah, let's keep going, and we'll jump back to Abigail in a little bit.
Okay. So the type of pickling that we're going to do tonight is, I think, the easiest type of pickling. Also, the pickling that I do most of the time. I like keeping it simple. I like things that don't take a lot of effort but produce really great results. And so the type of pickling we're going to do is called lacto fermentation. And when everyone hears lacto, and I think when I first heard this term, I also thought about dairy. It's not about dairy. Lacto refers to lactic acid, and all fruits and vegetables have lactic acid, have a beneficial bacteria called lactobacillus on its surface. So that's the lactic. That's why we call it lacto, because lactic acid is produced in this process. So in an anaerobic environment, which is oxygen free, which what these mason jars will be, which I'll get to later, it will convert. The bacteria will convert into sugar into lactic acid. So the bacteria on the fruit or on the vegetables will take the sugar from the vegetables and turn it into lactic acid. And that's going to inhibit any kind of harmful bacteria producing in the process. Because, if you let food just sit out on the counter, harmful bacteria would produce. But this process preserves the vegetables, and it gives the fermented vegetables their characteristic sour flavor. You can ferment or pickle almost any vegetable. My go-to ones that we're going to do tonight are mini cucumbers, and then cauliflower, red pepper, and carrots. I'll talk about those later when we get to the recipe. You can always throw in lots of different spices, and I can always share recipes for what kind of spices, but this process really keeps vegetables fresh and nutritious. There's another type of pickling that involves vinegar and sugar, and for that you have to really sterilize your jars, and so it's a lot more fuss than I really want to do, and I always get nervous when I read something about sterilizing. So I like to keep it simple. I also don't want to have a lot of sugar in my diet for reasons I don't need to go into. And so this process is great because all it is water and salt and the vegetables and then some other things thrown in. But basically what does the pickling is water and salt, which we would call a brine. It's a really, really old method. I'm sure most of you know this, to preserve vegetables. Because people grew vegetables in seasonal time, but they wanted to extend their ability vegetables beyond those seasons. So that's why pickling, was discovered or invented. There's various sources say there's lots of nutritional value to this. Some sources say that it supports gut and immune function. Some sources say that it helps with blood sugar and weight control, reduces blood pressure and cholesterol. So my blood pressure has gone down, my cholesterol's gone down, so maybe it's true. And the other thing that I like about my pickling journey is that I also do sourdough baking. I was going to bring my sourdough starter in to show you. And sourdough also has a fermenting. When you make sourdough bread, there's also a little bit of fermenting going on, because after you mix the dough up and when you let the dough rise, you mix your dough with your sourdough starter, which is basically drawing. Sourdough starter is flour and water that draws natural yeast from the air. So when you're making sourdough bread, at one point you let it all rise, and that's a fermenting process. And when I started thinking about it, I realized that the Hebrew word chametz, which we know from Passover, or chametz, and the modern Hebrew pronunciation, that ties all of this together. My bread baking and my pickling. In Hebrew, pickles are chamutz or chamutzim. So from the same root of chametz, the leavened stuff that we don't eat on Passover. The Hebrew word for sourdough is machmetzet, from that same root. So all this fermenting just ties together, things that are my two favorite things to do in the kitchen, which is baking sourdough bread and making pickles. So I created an Instagram account. If you want to follow me in that, it's called Chumetz NYC. I went for the Yiddish pronunciation, close to the modern Hebrew pronunciation, and I post lots of pictures of the pickles and the sourdough I make. If anyone wants to follow, that would be great. And if you have a cooking Instagram, I will follow you back in return. So quickly, like, how did I get into pickling? So I lived in Brooklyn Heights, if any of you know New York, for 10 years. I moved back. I'm a native New Yorker, but I moved back to New York in 2007. And I was living there for 10 years. And there's a great Lebanese market called Sahadi's, which has been there for generations. And they had all the stuff that I loved in Israel. They had it there. It was like, basically going into Sahadis is like having the shuk, everything you would want to find in the shuk and like the Jerusalem shuk, the Jerusalem market, all in one place. And they had the pickles that I grew to love in Israel. And then I realized, and with like many Israeli foods, I realized that what I think of as Israeli pickles are really just Middle Eastern pickles. And, you know, it's sort of like the Sahadi, having Sahadis, access to hot Sahadis also gave me a broader understanding of what the food is in Israel. Anyway, that's sort of the short version of this story is I left Brooklyn Heights and I moved to the Upper West Side of Manhattan, and I couldn't find the pickles that I loved anywhere. They were freshly made at Sahadi's. I couldn't find them anywhere on the Upper West Side. And I was like, how can I make them on my own? They can't be that hard. So I Googled a recipe, and that's more or less how I got started. Last thing I'll say by way of introduction is, you know, there are pickles in so many different cultures, and I think Abigail's going to talk about this a little bit later. So I'm sure some of you know about pickles in other cultures. I would just say one thing to my own, like growing up, is I'm an Ashkenazi Jew who grew up in New York. So Jewish delis had other types of pickles that I grew up with that I don't make, but they are still, you know, a favorite part of my sort of my gastronomic heart. They have a, you know, fond, like a special place in my gastronomic heart. Those sort of big sour pickles that you find on deli tables. I love those. I don't make those yet, as of yet, but that's where I am growing up. So the pickles that I'm making are more Middle Eastern type, and that reflects the fact that I spend so much time, you know, since I was in college, going back and forth between here and Israel. So should we start the demonstration?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, great. Can you still see me?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, great. So the first thing we're gonna make you got the recipe, Israeli or Middle Eastern pickles. It's so simple. I always have a jar in the refrigerator. I have a jar that's been made already to show you. You can see the color. I'll point to that later. There's always a jar of these in my refrigerator because they're just so easy to make. So the first thing you want is a jar. The jar should be clean, but clean just means you've run it through the dishwasher. You also have, these are called mason jars, because when you seal them, there's like a tight seal. You really want something that has a tight seal. You don't have to use a mason jar. There are other types of jars to use. And you always have to remember that you want your lid and the seal to be clean. They kind of rust after a number of uses. You can just buy a big box of them, so you always have some on hand, so you can recycle the ones that start to rust, and then you can put new ones on. So the first thing you want to do is, I just use this jar because I just needed to measure out. I wanted 2 cups of warm water, and I have 2 teaspoons of sea salt, and that's going to be the brine. I already measured out the sea salt. I put it in here so that I can mix it up and we can pour it in later. So we take our mason jar, and then the first thing you want to do is you just want to take mini cucumbers. They're called mini cucumbers. Sometimes they're called Persian cucumbers. And the basic thing you want to do is you just want to pack them into the jar, and as many as you can, and try to keep them kind of like lined up. When you buy these pickles, you know, you should look to see the size, because sometimes they're a little longer, sometimes a little shorter. You want like the shorter ones to be the ones that you pickle. So I usually can get about 5 or 6 into a jar. And I've had experience where if I pushed it too much and it crushes, so you don't want to do that, but you want to get it in. So again, it's a little tight. You want to get it in so that none of the pickles crush, but they're kind of tight together. Yeah, perfect. Maybe we can go down a little bit. Okay, I think it's fine.
Reuven, do you wash them before
Yes.
any particular way, or just
No,
water?
you wash them. All the vegetables are on the table have been washed already. Yeah, just wash them like you would, you know, if you were making a salad. So that's the That's how you put the pickles in. You know, I think these are a little tighter than I want, but they'll be perfectly fine. So then the next thing is garlic. So this is so simple because you don't have to like chop the garlic. You don't have to like peel the garlic. All you have to do is take a couple of cloves of garlic. I kind of figured out, like, first I started with one, then I put in two, and I discovered lately that 3 for me seems to do the trick. And it doesn't really like get like that super garlicky taste, but just 3 seems to work. So all I do is I just like crush them a little bit and kind of like fit them in as best as I can. They don't really have to stay in a certain place. The garlic sort of juice just permeates the whole brine, so you don't have to be like so specific about it. And then what I like to put in is I get one of these long hot red peppers whose name I never remember, but it's the long ones. And I generally cut it in half and just plop it in. And again, like I think I said this in the recipe, like it doesn't really add, it says it adds a kick, but I've never really felt like that my pickles come out super spicy. It just seems to add something really nice. So I would recommend it, but you know, if there's some you know, allergy or something to hot peppers or something that you're afraid of, like you don't really need it. Your pickles will be fine. And then the last thing is the dill. So again, you want to like kind of eyeball it. It's not, there's no exact science to it. If you like dill, you might want to add a little more. If you don't like dill, maybe you'll add a little less. I usually add about this much, if you can kind of see that. And I just like kind of also pack it in. Again, it doesn't really matter where it is.
Question for you. What if you don't have access to fresh herbs? Could you use something from a jar, or is it not as authentic?
You definitely can't use herbs from a jar. You definitely should use fresh herbs, but if you don't have the dill, just water and salt will be fine. Maybe there's something else you can put in. You know, if you had a bay leaf, which we're going to use in the next recipe, maybe a bay leaf would help, but I would not use dried dill. So if you can get fresh dill, which is usually in most markets, but if you can't and you just use salt and water and some garlic, it'll be perfectly fine. So now the next step is just to pour in our salt water. And you want to get the salt water covering all the cucumbers, which it has, and then you just cover it, and that's it. So what I do is I leave this jar in my kitchen near the window. So you want it, you know, in a place that gets a little bit of sunlight. And then what I do is I check every single day. I open it up a little bit and let air out. Like sometimes like a lot of air bubbles are in there, sometimes not, but just once a day, just kind of let it breathe a little bit. Make sure you reseal the jar, like let it breathe for like 30 seconds, but really make sure you reseal it. I forgot once, and that was a disaster. I think it was my only time I had a pickling disaster. And it's like it's kind of magic. Like after 3 days, they could be ready. I usually give it 4 days. What you're gonna look for is this like bright green color turning to like a dull green color. And then if they start looking like pickles, they're done. And then what I do is once I think they're ready after like 4 days, I put it in the refrigerator, wait till they're cold, and then I try and see if they kind out. So that's pickling. That's pickling cucumbers, or pickling Israeli pickles, or Persian cucumbers, or mini cucumbers. Any questions?
Yes, we have a few from the chat thread, and if folks are curious, please add your question. So Michael wants to know, do you ever cut the cucumbers before you put them into the jar?
No. I think I've seen some recipes for another type of pickle. Oh, actually, that when I make the next thing we're gonna make, I do slice the cucumbers. So yeah, you definitely can. I don't do it for this recipe, but I do it for others.
Great. And about how much sunlight, Helena would like to know, should the pickles get?
It doesn't, I don't think there's any exact science. Like I live in New York City. My kitchen does not face the street. It faces sort of the back area where other apartment buildings face. I don't get a huge amount of sunlight. So, and it seems to work fine, but I think if you're in a place that gets more sunlight, I think that'll be fine too. It's a good question. Maybe I'll look it up and see if there's any science out there on that.
Okay, and can you tell us how many times a day you open the lid and how long do they last in the fridge for Melissa and Evan?
Good question. So I open the lid once a day, usually in the morning, when I'm making coffee, I open it once. I learned, not with these pickles, but with other pickles I make, like open it over the sink because they could possibly like start bubbling over, but so I usually open up in the morning. I do it once. That seems to work. And in terms of the refrigerator, weeks and weeks and weeks. They don't go bad once they're in the refrigerator. Any other questions? These are great questions.
A question from Abigail about, can you save the brine and reuse it for something?
Oh. I don't know. I've never done that. My father used to drink pickle brine, so I know he reused it. I don't know. It's a good question. I'll have to look that up. You possibly could. I think there are probably people who are doing that. So I think that's a good question to look up.
And I think we're good for these questions. We can move on to the next demo.
Okay, so the next one is my other go-to pickles or lacto-fermented vegetables. And this recipe, you can use any vegetable you want. I gravitate towards cauliflower, red pepper, and carrots. And based from the last round when someone asked about cucumbers, so sometimes I slice up the cucumber and put it in this recipe. It's a great versatile recipe. I think you could probably try almost any vegetable that you think is a good vegetable to pickle. Maybe some cabbage, maybe some turnip. I think I've used once before. Lots of different, use your imagination. I think this recipe came from the Kitchen website, it's spelled without an E at the end. It's a great resource for cooking in general. And I think they say I think they give some other suggestions for some other vegetables. So I gave measurements for this recipe. I have to say, I don't really follow the measurements except for the water, the garlic, and the spices. For the vegetables, I never follow the measurements because I don't really see how they work. I just do it I eyeball it. And I like to layer the vegetables in the jar. So we're using I don't know what size. I guess this is a 64-ounce mason jar. It's twice the size of the other one. So this is the way I do it. Again, you do it, you have fun with it, and what you want to do something that ultimately you want to do something that tastes good, and it really doesn't matter how it looks. But if you want to try to make it aesthetically pleasing and take good pictures of it, layering it is, makes a nice tricolored picture. So I generally plop in a layer of cauliflower like that, and then let's see, maybe I'll add another one this side.
We are gonna quickly spotlight to Chad and Noah asking a question. Reuven, can you see this? Is this jar big enough for the pickling that they want to do?
It probably is. So this recipe calls for 4 cups of water. and the ratio is 3 tablespoons of salt to 4 cups of water, a quart of water. So what I would do is I would take that jar and measure how much water goes into it and then adjust the ratio accordingly. Does that make sense?
Great.
The other thing is, I mean, the jar, I mean, when you pour in the water into an empty jar, you're going to have more water than you're actually going to do, because the vegetables will displace some of the, you know, the space in the jar, so you won't actually need as much water. But just keep the same ratio, make the water according to the ratio, and then just pour the water in to fill the jar. That's the better way to do it. Instead of measuring how much water the jar takes, just make a bunch of water with this ratio and then pour in as much as you can after you put the vegetables in. Okay, so now I'm just gonna layer in the red pepper, and I chop it in big chunks. Again, that's just sort of, I guess, a matter of taste. But
And as you are layering this in, I want to quickly go to Lauren, who is cooking along, and do a quick spotlight on her and see if you don't mind sharing. How's it going? Oh,
Lauren, nice.
Okay. Yeah, so these are our little cucumber pickles, and then we're also doing along a mixture of cucumbers and peppers. So
Nice.
do you have a suggestion for how much salt we should do for this one?
I would do the ratio. So if you can get a quart of warm water and 3 tablespoons of salt, and then see how much, you know, try to pour in the water. And if you need to make up more water with the same ratio.
Thank you.
There are, I've sometimes followed this. There are like, I've read, you know, manuals for like making pickles that say you can also do it based on, like, you fill up your jar with the vegetables, take them out, measure, like weigh them with according to grams, and then the salt should be 2% of whatever the weight is of the vegetables, for the amount of water the jar would need. I think that's the way it is. I'll look that up and send it to you. But there's like a formula for doing it based on the weight of the vegetables you're going to use. So that's another process for determining how much water and how much salt. But I find like following a recipe that tells you exactly a tried and true method, that's better for me anyway. Okay, so this jar, maybe I can get a few more carrots in. Okay, I think this is it. Okay, so this recipe then, again, calls for a couple of cloves of smashed garlic. Guess I'll go for 3. Again, you don't have to like peel it, you just smash it. Wait, that one's bad. Let's do this one. Okay. This recipe calls for 1 bay leaf. 1 bay leaf. And then I already pre-measured these. These are coriander seeds, which if you can't find them, it doesn't really matter. You know, again, garlic and salt and a bay leaf would definitely do pickling. The pickling, I like the way that these taste, but if you can't find them, it's not a big deal. So this is a half a teaspoon of coriander, maybe a little more because the jar was almost empty, so I just used the rest of what's in the jar. And this is a little bit over a quarter of a teaspoon of black peppercorns. Oh, and yeah, I'm also going to put in a piece of the red pepper that I used for my other pickles. Again, you don't really need this if you don't, that's not your thing, but I like it, so I put it in. And then I pre-mix this is the warm water pre-mixed with the 3 tablespoons of salt. and I'll just see like how much, how much water will actually go in. Sometimes I have to add more.
I'm in love with all of the colors in that jar. It's like a masterpiece.
Yeah, so I'm gonna have to go in and add a little bit. I'm gonna have to make up a little bit more salt water. But let me just tell you how I finished the process. Where is it? Oh, okay. So in this kind of pickles, for some reason, you just have to be more careful about the top of the vegetables to make sure that they stay submerged under the water. For some reason, these pickles they're not so fussy about that, but for these pickles, it's like really important. So there are different methods. You can get weights to weigh down your pickles. And then I read somewhere that another method is to take grape leaves and to put them on the top. So I usually take 2 grape leaves and kind of fit them over the top of the vegetables, and that keeps the vegetables submerged under the water. And this recipe, again, every day you want to like let the air out, and you'll definitely see bubbles in this kind of pickling. So you definitely want to do that once a day and let it bubble until like the bubbles stop. Because then if you don't do that, the pickles kind of get this like weird sour taste. So you don't want to have that. I mean, they're not going to be bad. They're just going to be a little bit more sour and have this kind of weird bubbly stuff. And these are usually ready like in 4 days. With this kind of pickling, I would take out one of the vegetables on the 4th day, taste it, and if I feel like it needs to, go a few more days, then I let it go a few more days. So for this one, I like don't do it. You can't do it by eyeballing it because it's not going to change color. You want to do it by taste. And that's it. That's lacto fermentation. 2 really easy, quick recipes.
Can you hold up that giant jar for a photo?
Yeah.
That's great. Hold on. All right. Would you look at the camera with it?
Sure.
Perfect. Now, if you don't eat these veggies and if you're just snacking on them, that's one idea. But Jill has a great question. Are there any recipes that you use these vegetables with to complement certain dishes?
No, I just use it like instead of like, I try to have vegetables. I'm a vegan, so I eat a lot of vegetables. And I eat vegetables with every meal. So this is just in place of a salad or in place of a side vegetable. Like they're so fresh and so crisp, and I just use them in place of a side vegetable. So I have not used them in a recipe, but maybe there are recipes to use them in. I mean, you could add them to salads, and you can certainly do that.
I want to go spotlight to Chad and Noah for a second, who look like they're assembling some amazing pickling on the living room floor. It looks awesome. Way to go, guys. Anybody else want to share how it's going if you're cooking along with us? Lauren has made tremendous progress over there. And I know Katie is also preserving along with us. So this is great. Any other questions for Reuven? This was so cool. I know I've been admiring your pictures on Instagram for a while. So to see this and realize it's not so hard to do, I feel much more confident to try as I'm growing some vegetables right now. So hopefully in the future, I can share some photos too.
Growing?
Cucumbers, which I feel like would be perfect.
Yeah. Well, good luck. Can't wait to see your pictures. I
will tag you. Well, I think we are going to continue our learning through the lens of preserving, and Abigail and the team at Repair the World Atlanta have put together an amazing presentation to guide us through a conversation. And before I toss it back to her, there is one more question from Helena for Reuven. And of course, if others have questions, we can go back to them. But are there any veggies that you shouldn't pair together? And also maybe some that pickle quicker than others?
That's a good question. I mean, I think it's all a matter of taste. Like, I'm trying to learn how to pickle Brussels sprouts. Like, I haven't had great success with that. I think they take a long time to pickle because they're harder. So that one I know seems to take a long time. I've tried to like experiment with pickling like parsnips and turnips, like in this particular recipe. Seems to come out okay. If anyone knows Yota Motolangi's cookbooks, in one of his cookbooks, he has a great curried pickled recipe, which is mostly salt and water with a tiny bit of vinegar, but you don't have to do any sterilization. I like that, and he gives a suggestion for lots of different vegetables. I tried making kimchi once, which was kind of hard, and I definitely want to work on that. And I often make sauerkraut, which I really love, and it's super easy. It's a little bit different because you have to press. You salt the cabbage and then you draw out the moisture. You're not going to add in any more water because you're going to draw the moisture out of the cabbage. And in that's sort of to get back to your question. I throw in a lot of other vegetables into that. So I draw the water out of the cabbage, but I'll put in some carrots or I'll put in some other vegetables to just kind of make the sauerkraut more interesting. And that's pretty quick also. It's like a couple of days.
Great. Those also sound really, really good. And let's go to Abigail now, who's going to share her screen with us and engage all of you in this lesson around preserving.
Hello! Wow, I'm seeing myself on the screen, which is super weird and never happens on Zoom. But thank you so much, Reuven. That was wonderful. I learned a ton. And so did everybody else. That was so helpful. I would just like to say that we have a strong representation from Repair today, which is super exciting. We have my teammates, the other two fellows, Cecilia and Ben, are here. Lily, our director, is here. And shout out to Brenna, who is a fellow in Brooklyn and who is here, which is really, really awesome. Yeah, thank you so much. If you haven't heard of Repair the Worlds before, I'll just say a sentence about it. We are a nonprofit, a Jewish nonprofit that aims to engage the young adult Jewish community in meaningful service, which looks a little bit different right now. And we can talk a little bit later about some of the things that Repair is doing if you want to get involved with that. But yeah, so one of the things that we do is partner with awesome local organizations and individuals to spread some awesome knowledge and to do some fun things that raise awareness in the social justice world, in the Jewish world, and with our neighbors who are not necessarily Jews and who are also wonderful people. So yeah, okay, I should have shared my screen as I was talking, but I am gonna go to this really, really quick. It looks like a presentation and it's just a little thing to guide us along, like a chat that we're gonna have for the next 10-ish or so minutes. All right, so fingers crossed. I've only had like 5 technological glitches today so far. So, okay, yay! Welcome to our little discussion. Yeah, thank you. Cool. So do not fear this. There might be a lot of text on the slide, but it's all wonderful. And I'm wondering if Cecilia, you would be okay reading the first 2 paragraphs of this little snippet for us, if that's okay. I don't know. I'm not sure if I need to unmute.
I unmuted you, Cecilia, so you should be able to chat now.
Excellent. So should I start at food preservation?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So this is Emily Pastor on the joys of Jewish preserving. Food preservation methods have been critical to survival throughout history before the invention of refrigerators and freezers, and can date back to the Bible, where pomegranates and dates are mentioned and would have been preserved. Because of the prohibition of mixing meat and dairy, Jewish cooks have always relied on fruit as a way to end a meal, even a festive holiday. This led to the need to preserve fruit. From the time the Jews lived in ghettos and preserved food to make them last throughout a long and brutal winter, to the elaborate Middle Eastern mezes of pickled and marinated vegetables, Jews have always been proud preservers. The Jewish tradition of preserving is symbolic of the Jewish will to survive. From sea salt, sauerkraut, my Russian ancestors would weep with joy to see me eating that, to apricot poppy seed jam, for use in Hamantaschen, obviously. These recipes are keeping tradition alive, one lacto-fermented pickle at a time.
Thank you. Yeah, it was awesome because I had absolutely no idea what the history of preserving and I guess lacto fermenting and pickling foods looked like, but it goes back super far. And as a Jewish person, I think it's really cool that this seemed to be a huge part of Jewish heritage. So you'll see at the bottom of the screen, there's a few questions. I was just wondering if anybody had any thoughts on the first question, which is, how do you think it's possible that these ancient preservation techniques are still used today? Like, it's remarkable. Does anyone have any thoughts on that? And if you do, perhaps you could either raise your hand, and then maybe we can unmute you, or you can pop it in the chat, whatever's comfortable. I don't know if you can see my chat.
And I've just pasted the questions in the chat thread, so it might be easier for some people to see it if it's cut off on your screen.
Oh,
it looks like Lily has shared and Cecilia talking about passing on from generation to generation, which really relates to why my mom and I started Tradition Kitchens. We wanted to pass along recipes from different families and stories. Cecilia said that recipes don't go out of style. Anyone else? And we'd love to hear some voices, so you can feel free to unmute yourself and tell us your thoughts.
Yeah, and if you have any thoughts on the other two questions, like, I'm curious if anybody, whether or not you're coming from a Jewish background or any faith background, if you've ever had a connection with preserved foods and what that might have looked like. I'm really curious because I'm just learning that this is now a thing for Judaism.
So I'm Ashkenazi from tradition of Poland and Austria, and I deeply admire Sephardic Jewish traditions from Spain and Morocco. And one of the coolest traditions I learned about when I was traveling in Spain was about the use of preserved lemon and some of these amazing fruits in Persian foods that flavor the rices and are also very symbolic, I was told in my conversations there. So it's interesting when we can travel again and learn about other customs, but now we can learn about them from home. And it looks like we had some other folks share. So Brenna, would you like to unmute and share what you wrote in the chat thread, if you don't mind?
I would love to. Can you hear me? I'm good.
Yeah.
So I was when you think about like showing other generations how to cook, and like when you have a certain taste in your mind, or like you want to make sure something's done a special way, you kind of make an effort to share that, and it keeps it alive. So like even if you've never been to a Jewish deli, maybe someone in your family used to go there a lot, and so that's something that you've eaten like at gatherings and that kind of thing.
I love that. Yeah, collective memory is so powerful and important. It's a great term that you used.
It looks like Alyssa and Evan had some great memories. Would you like to elaborate on that? And thank you, Brenna, for your wonderful comments.
Yeah, sure. I just have always loved going to Jewish delis and hitting the pickle bar hard because it's my favorite part. But I never knew that there was kind of like a Jewish history to pickling and fermenting. I honestly had no idea. So it's so cool to learn that there is this history. So thank you so much for sharing it.
And it looks like Ruby has raised her hand. Would you like to share?
Yeah.
And later.
So this activity is interesting and timely because I was supposed to be working as a camp counselor this summer. It's technically a gig that's still on, but it seems unlikely, but that's besides the point. They still are asking us to write some activities in advance. And one of my jobs is going to be through the kitchen. So planning activities, I was actually thinking through a lot of these questions, and sort of my thoughts and what I wanted to discuss with the campers were how a lot of Jewish tradition is based off of like ritual meals, certain special like classic dishes, and obviously differences between different kinds of Judaism and in different houses. But just I think there is a common thread with food being very important, and like shared recipes being a really big part of the culture, and it being important to like pass it down generationally and that kind of thing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I hope you can have that camp experience and share those lessons either virtually or in person, perhaps. And Isabel added another great comment before we go to the next slide about people in of all cultures are always looking for ways to fight harmful microorganisms with helpful microorganisms. So that's really, really spot on. And Reuven touched upon that a little bit about the health benefits of preserving, which is great. I know I drink a lot of kombucha tea because of that. So Abigail, talk us through this next slide.
Yeah. Would the Nadelson House like to read this next paragraph for us, if that's okay?
Sure. We're just moving the screen so we can, there we go. Okay. Anna Stevenson on The Jewish Farmer. Since becoming a Jewish farmer, I found that Jewish tradition has deep roots. For instance, Shavuot, the holiday of first fruits. When you grow most of what you eat, you have to wait. Everything comes in its time. Throughout the spring, we'd been tilling, preparing beds, and transplanting plants. By the end of May, I was ready for some leafy greens. But at Adamah, guided by the Torah's agricultural laws, we offer up our first fruits, placing the first full-sized leaf of kale or first ripe tomato on the makeshift altar, essentially saying, "This is not mine. I do not take credit for it, and I am grateful for it." Really does make you pause. At the moment when we are most likely to pounce on the food on the table and take the harvest for granted, Jewish tradition asks us to pause, acknowledge the miracle, and give thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, this passage had extra meaning for me this year, since this is the first time that I have also been growing my own food and waiting that waiting for it to finally pop up and be able to eat. And I understand that not everybody has this experience of growing food. So if anybody wants to answer, if you don't identify as a farmer or a grower, what is something in your life that you give up the way that that Judaism sometimes encourages us to give up the first fruits? And why do you choose to sacrifice it? Anything that you can think of? Hello and goodbye, maybe. Or it can be a rhetorical question, because I know we only have a few minutes. You can also think about, there's a line in this text that implies that you should not take credit for the first fruits of the harvest. One should not attribute the credit to themselves for growing it. They should remember that it was the earth that did that. So do you agree with that? Do you agree that we should not take credit for the first fruits of the harvest? I'm not sure how I feel about that. I kind of want to take credit. Oh, I see that the chat is lighting up. Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Cecilia. It's very interesting. It puts a lot of humility into the growing world. But yeah.
I've heard about people who sometimes have grown their own fruits and vegetables, and then the first fruit that comes, they will give it to their neighbor or somebody who might be hungry in their community. So that could be one way of interpreting this. And I've heard of that. This is a very interesting reflection and text to learn from. Any other reflections on this one? This is very, very deep. Lily is sharing, and would you, I'll read for you unless you're able to unmute. I can unmute, perfect.
Unmute actually. Hi everyone. I was just saying, I think it reminds me of the idea of people saying they're self-made. The idea of giving credit to a whole system that produces something and not just our own labor. So like, yes, as the farmers, we put in a lot of the work, but there are all these other components of the system that have to come together to actually produce the fruit.
Yeah, totally.
And especially right now, this is so relevant when you think about the supply chain and how we're trying to get fruits and vegetables. And I know some of us have heard in the news these terrible stories of farms that have dumped their fruits and vegetables, and making sure that that doesn't happen anymore and that we can get it to the people who need the food and rectify that. And I saw some hopeful news that Publix, which is a grocery store chain in the Southeast, is doing that here. And I'm sure there are others, independent farmers and great grocers who are stepping up in other regions around the world too. Abigail, should we go to the next and last slide for conversation?
Yeah. Yeah, I can read this one really quickly. By Kenneth Halpans on Defiant Gardens, which is an awesome last name. Though short-lived, like the ghettos themselves and their prisoners, ghetto gardens were mechanisms of resistance to the horrific conditions under which people lived. They were acts of hope and defiance. By attempting to create conditions for their survival, by creating the gardens, ghetto residents also made for themselves work, relief, solace, and food. From Defiant Gardens, Trinity University Press. And so that everyone is familiar or is caught up, when it mentions ghettos here, and it refers to some of the conditions that a lot of Jews and a lot of individuals in Europe were subjected to a time ago. The 20s, 30s, oh shoot, somebody can help correct me on the history. But the context here is that there was a time in which a lot of individuals were living in conditions that were not super wonderful. And I'm going to check out the chat. Oh, yes. Yeah. Thanks, Lily. This refers to World War II. Okay, thank you. I wasn't sure about that. But yeah, so obviously conditions were not good, and a lot of people were coping by creating these gardens that were in such opposition to their surroundings. So yeah, what could be the significance of these beautiful little symbolisms of life amidst so much trauma and terror? Yeah. And have you ever been surprised by the location of a garden? Yeah.
I've definitely stumbled across some really cool sort of hidden secret gardens in cities. Some of them have been more flowers and rather than vegetables and fruits, but I think there's something really powerful about seeing something growing when you're not expecting it in a place. And Reuven added in the chat, and this really goes back to the past slide, but actually you want to share your reflection because it's really beautiful in your own words. I'm going to unmute you.
Yeah, sure. I was going to have another reflection too. So yeah, I mean, going back to the previous slide, like pickling and making sourdough is all natural ingredients. And I feel like it really does honor the bounty of the harvest. You're just keeping everything, everything natural. It's just salt and water, and in the case of bread, it's flour and it's vegetables. And I just feel it just shows some honor to like really being close to the harvest and close to the bounty. And then on this slide, like I know where I live very close to urban environments, some of which are like have great access to the markets that I have access to. But there's like a whole movement of community gardens to help people grow their own fresh fruits and vegetables if they don't have nearby markets, and to solve the problem of the what we call food deserts.
Thank you. That's wonderful. We appreciate those lessons that you took away. And in the chat, Katie is mentioning that there was a shelter in downtown Atlanta that's no longer there, a homeless shelter, and that they had a roof garden, it sounds like. And that's a brilliant idea. I know I've seen a lot of roof gardens around Atlanta and in New York when I was there. So another way to add some growth in unexpected places and give those that what you're growing away to others. And I saw something actually, Brenna, do you know anything about squatter gardens? Not to put you on the spot, but I'm curious.
I know that they're really interesting, and I don't think I can do them justice, but if people have time to look them up, it's a really interesting like way of looking at land ownership and gardening and like communal good and food.
Thank you. I'd never heard of it before, so I'm looking forward to learning more.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I know it's a few minutes past 8:30. If anybody has final thoughts, somebody else might be talking. Wow, sorry. Well, thank you so much. Does anyone have final thoughts?
I think we are leaving people with a lot of food for thought, pun intended. But this has been wonderful. Thank you so much, Abigail and the team at Repair, for leading us through this amazing lesson and conversations around preserving and food. And Reuven, we are just so grateful to you for giving us the confidence to pickle and ferment and just really get creative in the kitchen. It's possible for all of us. So we look forward to following you. I slid his Instagram in the chat thread, Humitz NYC, and we'll tag him in our post. But if you do pickle, let us know so that we can share your great pictures. And Abigail, anything, Reuven, anything you want to say to wrap us up?
I'm eating a pickle from that I made last week. These are preserved lemons because Julia mentioned them. They're really easy to make too. And here's my sourdough starter. So from all my fermenting family, I say have a really great night. Thank you so much for letting me do this. Now I have a fresh batch of pickles for next week.
Oh my God.
Great reminder plug from Chad and Noah on Spring into Solidarity. Do you want to speak to that, Abigail? Or do you want me to?
Oh, go for it.
Sure. So because somebody brought it up, Repair the World is fundraising for 3 of our partners who are doing on-the-ground emergency response work here in Atlanta. And maybe Cecilia or Ben can put the link in the chat while I'm talking about it. But we have a campaign going between now and mid-May, trying to raise $1,000 for each. SWIAC is a food pantry in the West End where Abigail is a regular volunteer, one of her placements for the fellowship. Concrete Jungle is a partner of ours that's working to feed over 600 people, delivering groceries to their door for free during this crisis. And Pa Kids is an after-school program and community center in Grove Park that has also converted themselves into a large-scale feeding operation for the Grove Park neighborhood. So if you are moved to support feeding folks in Atlanta, we would love for you to contribute through us. Thanks.
Thank you. That's amazing work that you all are leading, and hopefully everyone can find a way to get involved. We'll send a follow-up email with a link to learn more, and if you're able to share that in the chat thread with a link to donate or support, and we'll also post it on the live Facebook page where this is being broadcast so more people can know about it. And if you want to keep cooking with us, tomorrow we were inspired by Reuven and the fermentation to do sourdough waffles and a little bit of sourdough starter. So I'll also put a link for those of you who want to register for that. And Abigail, anything else that you want to say to wrap us up?
Thank you so much, everybody. This was awesome, and thank you for the virtual discussion. That was great too. If anybody likes sustainability and fashion, we're doing a sustainability strut, which is a fashion show. It'll be, oh my gosh, the 14th, May 14th or May 13th. And so there's lots of wonderful stuff coming up. Sorry.
Great.
Thank you. Thank you.
No, we appreciate your enthusiasm for making a difference in the world. You embody that so well. And thank you to to Abigail's family for joining. It was great to meet you, and to all of our friends from every place around the country. It was great to have you. And we'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.